Hello, I'm Tammy Rose, and this is Concord Days. In July of 2019, I had the privilege and the honor of presenting my play, Thoreau and Twain, Brothers on the River, at the annual gathering of the Thoreau Society. It was received very well, and I even took it to St. Louis and Hannibal, Missouri, and presented it there for the Sam Clemens Conference. It was an amazing in-person experience. I had such tremendous feedback from it that I was very excited to go around and tour it and to go into classrooms and to make it this very beautiful, intense, one-on-one kind of education of bringing Thoreau and Twain into the modern world. And then, of course, the pandemic happened. So I and like a lot of other playwrights, performers, theater people, teachers, I was forced to be creative. And my favorite line from that play is, "Even our ghosts have ghosts." Thoreau was dealing with tuberculosis. He was dealing with the death of his brother. Twain was also dealing with the death of his brother. And we're living in a time of tremendous pain. But history is going to look back at us and wonder actually what happened. So today I have my collaborators with me, and we're going to talk about what it's like to actually be a historian in this kind of time. I would like to introduce author and historian Richard Smith.
Nice to see you, Tammy. How are you? Nice to see you, Nikki. So, yeah, we all had big plans for 2020, didn't we? I do living history as Thoreau, and of course I had a lot of gigs lined up throughout the spring and summer and fall of 2020, meeting with schools and museums and libraries and colleges, either coming to Walden Pond to see Mr. Thoreau or me going to them. And then all of a sudden, February and March hits, and we're in a pandemic, and I was watching my gigs dry up one by one by one by one, just disappearing, because suddenly schools are closing and colleges are closing and libraries are closing. And I was in the same boat as everybody else who deals with the public, educators as well as artists and musicians. What do we do? Our jobs are suddenly gone. I discovered very quickly that being an author and a historian, I was non-essential. I was suddenly the non-essential personnel that everybody was talking about. And so I had to figure out what to do pretty quickly, how I was going to somehow try to earn a living doing something that I could no longer do. Right, Nick? Didn't that happen with you?
So it's so funny because to be a programming director and then hear, you're not allowed to do programming right now because we are shut down. You're kind of like, well, what do I do? Like, my whole job is planning programs around telling this history in Concord. So how am I going to do that? And it's funny because I think we were all, and I maybe I shouldn't say we all, but I will say I have always been kind of adverse to being tech on the history we tell, because I feel like it's really important to be in that space, to feel the energy of that space, to interact with it, right? And so I'm always like, why would we go tech? We'll just do it here, right? That's always been my answer. Like, why would we do that? We'll just do it on the lawn. And so to kind of be told like, yeah, no, you don't have another option. It has to be tech. It has to be virtual. It forced me to kind of start thinking outside the box in a way that I think actually has now creatively helped me. And now I see a good fusion possible, like when we open back up again, a good fusion of us being able to like do both virtual and that I think I was standoffish for before, but now with it being so normal for people, I'm trying to adapt and evolve.
Yeah, well, and this is the thing, because I feel like we've had this technology around, right? We've had the internet for at least 20 years in our professional lives, right? We've had easy access to video ever since we've really gotten like the iPhone. We've been able to put things online, and I honestly don't know whether it was an issue of laziness or not another person to actually help coordinate it, or just another element when you're trying to do a live event and you want to make sure that there's coffee and somebody's working on the guest list so you can follow up, and like there's just
donations, right? Like how do you do all of that, right? And like I mean, I'm a Generation X, like, or Generation Xer, right? Like I am the generation that really absorbed every single form of technology as it went through, right? Like I went from putting my finger in a hole and dialing the number to literally now being able to just say, "Hey Siri, da 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 da," right?
Yeah.
You would, oh yeah, she's gonna come up. No, I don't want you to do anything. But like, why was I standoffish on this? Why did I refuse? What was wrong with me?
But I don't think that you're alone. I think that it's been kind of the tradition of a lot of not-for-profits or museums, or especially in the history space, that, oh, if you want to do technology, you should leave it for the little kids because that's all like the flashy, showy stuff. But our audience is much more formal, and they're used to learning in a classroom type setting. So that's all we can really offer them.
Sure.
I think it was actually introduced, and I think I was starting to get actually warmed up after attending the African American Association of African American Museum conference in Mississippi, and seeing the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, like the combination of tech and how I want a museum to look, if that makes sense, was done perfectly. And I think that might have actually
Can you describe that? Describe that a little bit more, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a if you go to Mississippi ever, it's a phenomenal museum, and if we talk about civil rights, Mississippi is probably where the heart of everything happened, right? And accessible in a really easy way to, accessible in many ways. But what the museum really did was take Fanny's Fanny's typewriter and put it next to a virtual screen of her talking.
Fannie Lou Hamer, right?
You have her actual typewriter that you can see, which dork me, I'm like, oh my God, can I touch it? I can't touch it. Just in case, like I'm losing it, right? Like this is what she wrote on. And then hearing her voice, right? Combined with the interaction of walking between two different sides of the museum and knowing that if you're in a certain body, certain lights come on to interact with you and speak to you in ways that definitely affect you, but then having a real artifact like a KKK robe in front of you, right? So like for me, it was a combination of having those two things, and to see it be done so beautifully and eloquently without like and having all of the feelings I have when I walk into like any other museum, but then really having that virtual experience that I know like my daughter who's 11 is so used to, right? Being able to touch the screen and scroll through every letter that Fanny wrote, to be able to go into an in cave and listen to what it might have sounded like to be in, a police buggy and being arrested, right? Like that's a real interaction she would get more from than I would, but me reading it and or seeing the actual artifact, that's where I interact. And so it was the first time I think I've seen it done together in fusion that worked. Because I think some places do it and it just doesn't feel natural, And so I think that was part of my fear too, is like, if we do that, if we bring tech into the Robbins House, does it feel right? Does it feel like we're trying too hard? Is it actually going to get the younger generation to feel like they can interact with this history, or is it going to make them feel like this is ridiculous and bogus? I don't want to be a part of it, right? So,
right. Or I'm also trying to think of it as like from the point of view of maybe being like a white docent in a museum like that, right? Because how do you relate the history and remove yourself at the same time?
Right.
So using the technology to put somebody into the heart of the story can allow them the immediate empathy without having to go through like the additional relationship of staying with the tour group. And am I supposed to cry now? Am I supposed to how am I supposed to respond?
Right.
Well, and the biggest challenge that I had for myself, so if I go to a school or a library as thorough, I go in my 19th century clothing. I read my lecture from paper like he did. A lot of times I don't even use a microphone, because it's the 19th century. So suddenly, Mr. Thorough has to figure out how to Zoom and use his cell phone. And when I started to get people, like schools would say, well, you can't come to our school, but does Mr. Thorough Zoom? And my initial reaction was, I don't know. Does does Mr. Thorough Zoom? Could he Zoom? Should he Zoom? And, the first few times that I did it, it was kind of awkward, but I was feeling not awkward as Richard Zooming. I was feeling awkward as Henry Thorough Zooming. And the one question the kids cannot ask me is, Mr. Thorough, how are you Zooming? Because that just completely blows the whole theory that they're somehow talking to Henry Thorough and it's 1854. Or, I've done a couple of Zooms from Walden Pond. And I just think it would be really interesting that, I'm standing in Walden Woods dressed as Thorough, Zooming on my cell phone, which is completely unnatural and completely bizarre. But
actually, as Nikki said, like for her daughter, for the younger generation, all of that stuff actually just gets erased immediately. Like all of the stuff that we're still conscious of, it's not an issue for them.
Right. And the kids that I've been dealing with when I'm Zooming with them as Thorough, the kids seem to be completely nonchalant about the whole thing. Like, oh yeah, there's Henry Thorough on a screen. Like it's something they would expect to see. Whereas I'm feeling totally awkward and weird and uncomfortable holding the phone in front of me talking as Henry Thorough. I've gotten used to it, but the problem is this is the situation we all faced. How do we keep doing what we love to do when we're not allowed to go to the places that we want to do it from? Fortunately, I can go to Walden Woods and do it there, but the reception in Walden Woods sucks. So
perhaps intentionally, right?
Which thank God it does. But how so suddenly there's all these new issues that as a historian you have to deal with, or I should say as a public historian, because look, we're all public historians with a very big emphasis on the word public, because we love being in front of people. I mean, for me, I love having a huge full room full of people asking me questions and hanging on every word. I mean, that's part of the fun, never knowing what questions they're going to ask. And now suddenly I'm sitting in my kitchen as Henry Thorough. My 21st century kitchen plays the part of Henry Thorough's house at Walden Pond.
Yeah. I'm in my kitchen saying, okay, so who's got tech, right? Who is actually dealing with our audio right now? Who's watching the chat right now? Because I know chat's running and I can't just present and check the chat, right? Like, is everyone that I'm with, did we do a good enough sound check? Did we do enough tech check? It's so different, right? Like even when we did our 4th of July event at Umbrella, I was really lucky to have Philip there to like deal with the visual tech and recording, because then I'm sitting there with, all of our speakers, all of our readers. I'm trying to make sure they all have everything that they need. They're totally fine, mind you. I'm just flipping out because that's what I do. And, make sure our slideshow works. We didn't have the right cord. So like we're rolling around. Julian's like, I don't know where the cord is either. And we're like, oh, wait, there might be one in my car. And so then we find one. And then I think Phil helped us out because he was like, oh, that should work with that. It was exactly my fear of running a program added with the technical, like, inept tech head that I don't have, right? Like, what am I doing? Right. But somehow we were able to pull it off. And we were really lucky that, we at the Robbins House had a common friend between us and Umbrella, and Umbrella was willing to let us use their auditorium because, again, like Tammy said, they had built this huge space, this huge auditorium. And then COVID hit and they couldn't use it, right? So no one had actually been in it. We were actually one of the first few people to actually use the space.
Oh my God. Right. Because for the Umbrella and for those of you who don't know, the Umbrella is this marvelous community like education center, and it has art, it has studios. I've taken a children's literature class there. They have a large auditorium. They have a smaller black box where they have a theater company running out of. It's incredibly creative, and they literally just finished a major renovation, and I think they were opening the theater like in 2019.
Right.
And it's the same thing with the Concord Museum.
Right.
They had just finished this multi-million-dollar expansion. They were ready for hordes of people, and they were expecting classrooms of kids to come in on a regular basis. And COVID hit, and suddenly, how do you reach your audience?
Well, so was it last Martin Luther King Day? Nikki and I did a joint program at Walden Pond, talking about Thoreau and Dr. King and Gandhi and civil disobedience and BLM. And we had like 60 or 70 people. And Nikki had a really great PowerPoint presentation. And we had all these people watching us and asking us questions. And we had discussions. And this was so January of 2019. And Nikki and I are thinking, this is great. You know, we can take this on the road next year, and we can go to this place and go here and there. And then I think it was the last time Nikki and I saw each other like in the flesh, because suddenly, and anybody else that was at the program, you know, all these friends that came to see us, because suddenly we're not allowed to do that stuff anymore. Right. And so we all really had to rethink, okay, we've got these amazing things that we need to say. We've got a receptive crowd in Concord who will come to basically anything that we put on, and now we can't do it. So, you know, and I don't want to say, oh, woe is me, because everybody that I know is in the same situation, whether you're a teacher or an educator or an artist or a musician. I've got lots of friends in bands who haven't played out in a year. Right. So we're all in the same boat.
And also for anybody who's watching us 100 years from now, if that ever happens, I also just want to acknowledge this kind of universal, I don't know if it's malaise or depression or just general confusion, because I think that we also didn't know how long it was going to last, how the extent of it, what it was supposed to, you know, how do you go about protecting yourselves? Could you, back in March, we were wondering, can you still plan for things for the summer? How long is this going to last? You know, as of the end of 2020, I think we're still in this weird space of like, you know, should we just continue to stay online and, you know, stay with our audience and just plan for whenever this is going to end, because who knows when it's going to end.
Right. Like I'm thinking about January 2021 for us, right? Like, what do we just plan for it to be a virtual conversation? You know, like it's so hard to plan.
Yeah.
Well, I remember in March saying to people, well, we'll just make it through till the end of April, you know, and then, you know, of course, April 19th in Concord is the High Holy Day, where we celebrate the Battle of Concord and Patriots Day. And I think it really hit me when not just the town of Concord, but Walden Pond and the Old Manse and all of the sites in town canceled their Patriots Day events. The parade was canceled. The dawn salute was canceled. The reenactments in Lexington were canceled. And I think that that's really the first time that it hit me that I thought to myself, oh crap, now what? Now what do we do? Mm-hmm. You know, and then it's like, well, we'll just make it through till the end of April. And then April, May, June came. Well, maybe we can plan stuff for July. But then the Thoreau Society annual gathering got canceled for July. So there were all these
the high holy gathering for Thoreau enthusiasts and everybody else who's interested in the
There's all these little stepping stones throughout the year that we all look forward to. Patriots Day and the annual gathering and the 4th of July. I mean, all these events, but they were all getting canceled one by one. So I think that... And
there also wasn't like enough idea of stepping in and creating some kind of Zoom gathering or lecture series at that point. Because there was no way to really replace, like, how do you replace an in-person parade, you know, of April 19th, right? Like, how do you create kind of programming? And I think that that's also what we're looking at this year. Like, how do you create the kind of programming that's going to keep your community alive and all of the people who are into history and into these traditions? How do you still check in with them?
Right. Well, I'm happy to say that. So the Concord Tour Company that I work for, we have been doing tours throughout the pandemic. You know, we've been very careful about how many people can go on the tours. You know, we're face masked the entire time, as are the people who come on the tours. But instead of doing tours for like 10, 12, 14 people like I usually do, I'm doing tours for 2 people or tours for 3 or 4 people.
And you're outside.
We're outside. We're outside, which is great. But, you know, so at least I've had that bit of interaction with people, being able to give tours, walking tours of Concord, thank goodness. But I think that we've all, what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention. I think we've all become really good at this whole Zoom high tech. This probably isn't even, it's not even high tech to us anymore, because it's just a part of our daily lives.
Yep.
Even we're just Zooming with friends, and we're Zooming with relatives and stuff like that. It's just, a year ago at this time, nobody had any idea what Zoom even was. And now,
so infrequently that it was like, I don't need to really master it. I just need to be able to sign in, right? But now we're all like, I have a background, right? Like, you could probably sit there and put a background up and be thorough. Like,
sure.
You can do that. You probably are like, 1, 2, 3, I got it done. But, January, you was like, what are you talking about?
Right. It reminds me of 20 years ago when I got my first email. It seemed so daunting and weird, and Zoom seems so daunting and weird. And now when people ask me to do a program or ask me to give a lecture, the first question I ask is, okay, do you have a Zoom? I'm assuming everybody has a Zoom connection now.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Because now it's just another tool in our toolbox. So, say 6 months from now, let's play the pandemic game. So in 2 months when things are normal, are we gonna keep doing virtual meetings and virtual lectures? Because I have to tell you, I've probably talked to more people around the world through my virtual lectures than I would if I was giving a lecture at the Concord Public Library.
Yeah, and I think that's what's great about this, right? Like, we have actually been able to say to people, you no longer can say that you have no access, so that's why you don't know what you should know, right? Like, we are making it so easy for you to be able to log in, right? Like, even if you have a classroom of kids, if you say, okay, I want to do one West Coast classroom and one East Coast classroom that's actually with me, you can have that West Coast classroom Zoom in and watch as you give that tour or give that talk, and they're still getting a similar experience, right? It's pretty equitable in that they're getting an experience that they wouldn't maybe be able to do because they would have to fly here, right? And that expense takes away the equity. So now you're actually making it a fair game of education ability by letting them be able to get in, right? And so we've almost given people there's no longer an excuse because we've adapted to the tech, right? Like, all right, you can come, just let me know. You want to do it? Let's, we can set up a Zoom, right? Most schools have an account now. So hook me up, send me the link, and I will give your school that is 5,000 miles away a tour as though they were standing right here.
Yeah, every lecture that I give, that I've given forever, there's always somebody, a friend of mine, who will say, "Oh gosh, I would have loved to have been there, but I can't make it." Even when I was singing in bands back in the 80s, "Oh, I'd love to go, but," well, that's not an excuse anymore.
So that, right? Because we have taken away this inequity, so to speak, by being able to do this. And it's more justice minded, right? That we're able to really say, here's access to something you usually don't have access to. And especially for educators, right? Like, you want to teach it. Let us help you teach it, right? Even though you're in Ohio, even though you're in Michigan, wherever you are, let us help you teach it. And then go with it, right? And come back if you need more help or more, insight or anything like that. But it really has changed how we allow people access in.
Yeah, a couple months ago.
So what about what's going to happen in 5 years, right? Can you imagine a hybrid model where sometimes there would be some people there in person and some people live, or do you think that it's also a better experience and more clear if everybody is 100% one way or the other?
I want holograms like in Star Wars.
Where you
hold out your hand, and there's Nikki giving her lecture. So
I think it's funny because I'm such a Disney fan, right? And so sometimes when I'm bored, I will just throw on a YouTube video and watch someone walking through a ride. But I still want to go on the ride, you know what I mean? And so it's filling a little bit of the void of not being able to be there for Christmas or not, be there for Halloween. But I still want to go. And I think, or rather, I hope that that's what we're going to see, is that people will take advantage of the ability to zoom in whenever they can, but that they still want to be in the presence of that space, right? That they still want to be a part of it in a tangible way. So I'm hoping it becomes a hybrid. I hope that we have those moments where people are like, I can't get there today, but I want to learn about this specific thing you're talking about, and then I'll visit in the fall, right? Like that's what I can.
I think the Robbins House did a really good job when the Robbins House had the BLM protest, and you were doing it live in the front yard, but you also had the laptop set up so that people could watch it virtually as well. And I think that from now on, when I start doing lectures live, I think I'm going to insist that we have a laptop available so that people can watch it virtually, as well as people in the audience watching it live. Yeah. When I did a lecture a few months ago for the Thoreau Farm about the fugitive slave law, I had a woman in Australia watching me. It was like 9 a.m. tomorrow. And she was watching me give my lecture in Concord. So, I like the idea that I can have a live audience in front of me in Concord, but have people in other countries watching me do it at the same time. Right. One of my favorite things live is getting questions. But when I'm doing Zoom programs, I like getting the questions just as much. That people
and also, but what about, sorry to interrupt, but what about social media? Because how else would you get the attention of somebody in Australia? Or how else do you get publicity for groups like that, right? And you can literally get questions you could do a Facebook Live, or you could do like some other, I know people are doing stuff on Twitch and Twitter and stuff.
Yeah, I like Facebook Live a lot. I've done a couple of Henry Thoreau walkabouts on Facebook Live.
Yeah, and I think Facebook Live is great.
It's really cool.
Yeah. And I think with Facebook Live, you get the ability to really interact on like a real time. Like Zoom is great, but Facebook Live just has this ability to be very real time, if that makes sense. It feels different, which is why I think it's really great for programs that we do. And I know a lot of other museums have taken advantage of doing Facebook Lives with, like interpreters as well, which I think it does play well for that.
Yeah. I find that every time I watch a video, it's always because I've seen it on Facebook or posted on Twitter, right? Like I never know I don't really have a plan for it, but I was like, oh, okay, there was a reading that I missed. So I'm going to click on the video, or, there's something happening right now and oh my God, I get to join.
Right. So that little alert comes up. You're like, oh, what is that? Maybe I'll just press and, it's on in the background. I think that's the other part that we've allowed, like this has allowed history to be on in the background as well, right? Like you can listen to a talk and just put it on your TV that, like for me, I have a TV in my kitchen that's only YouTube accessible. Like, it's just on the Wi-Fi. So like if there's a talk coming, I can just be like, okay, that's on YouTube. I can press, or Facebook, I can just listen from the kitchen, right? As I'm doing my other life things. And then also allows you to replay, because to me, that's the other really great advantage, right? Like if I listen to a talk, sometimes I'm missing something because I'm just doing this the whole time, right? Versus like taking notes, right? So it gives you the ability to go back, right? And actually like re-engage with what you learned and like take notes, right? Or I missed that, or just I need to refresh, right? Like I don't really remember it. So I think that's the other great part of this.
Or put it on pause, right? If you have to answer the doorbell, or if you have something else to do, like it's a way. I feel like I haven't spent so much time learning about history or attending as many, even the conferences that have gone online. There was a whole Emily Dickinson conference held from that house. And instead of reading all of her poems from beginning to end over, a day or so, they did just a few hours every day. And I was able to check in and make time for it. And I had it just playing in the background. And I'm going to be really disappointed if they only do it like in person ever again.
Well, yeah, I find myself watching lectures from museums that I've never heard of. From other parts of the country and other parts of the world. I found myself one evening watching a lecture about Civil War nurses in Alabama, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. I'm not doing anything anyway. And next thing you know, I'm watching this lecture about Civil War nurses in Alabama or wherever. Yeah. And I think that that's just going to be, this is the beginning of us doing I think it's going to be hybrid forever now. Every time I would give a lecture in the past, somebody would always say, oh, was it videotaped? And 9 times out of 10, it wasn't.
Right.
So, now everything we do is going to be available for people to watch.
Yeah, it's like its own renaissance, right? Like it's like a new renaissance in a way.
Yes.
And every site in town. I mean, I can't think of any historic site in town. Orchard House does Facebook Live programs all the time. We've done a bunch of live programs from the Thoreau Farm. The Robbins House obviously has done stuff. The Concord Museum has done a bunch of stuff.
Right, the Concord Library, the archives, they're doing a marvelous series there. It's really incredible.
So, because this is what we have to do now, whether or not, because look, we don't know when people are going to start coming back to Concord. We don't, who knows what Patriots Day is going to look like next year. We don't even know if there's going to be a Patriots Day. We don't know if there's going to be an annual gathering. We don't know what's going to happen. Right. So, I wouldn't be surprised if the people at Minuteman National Park put together some kind of a Revolutionary War event on Zoom for Patriots Day, because people like Jim Hollister over at the National Park, they're as tuned into this new technology as the three of us are, because we have to be, because we sat around in February, March, and April being completely depressed because we couldn't go anywhere, and we were broke and lonely, and suddenly somebody's like, oh, there's this thing called Zoom, and we're still broke, but we're not so lonely.
No. No, I would like to build on the Renaissance piece of it. I feel like we're living in such an amazing time where also like podcasts are available. So one of my favorite things is, stuff you missed in history class, where they specifically outline all of the history lessons and events in history that are not part of this mainstream curriculum. And then you hear about things and you're like, I really want to learn about more. Right. So this is providing that space to really help us evaluate a larger and more fuller sense of our history. Nobody's pressed for time. Right. Nobody's worried about having to squeeze everything into just an hour, because now it's limitless.
Yeah. And it used to be like the podcast was all about the murder mystery, right? Or movie podcasts. Like I was big on listening to podcasts that took apart all the movies that I love.
And those are still good.
And those are still great. But there's new space now where it's like, oh, the book that I read, someone's talking about that, right? Or, I'm watching, I'm obsessed with Lovecraft. And so to listen to a podcast that discusses the historical points within the show that I love and being able to pause it, go finish the dishes, and then put it back on, those types of moments, it's really great because I'm actually able to, I guess, digest more information than I ever thought I was, in a way that's not making me want to pass out on the couch and go to sleep. That's really engaging and exciting, and opens up another door to something else that I want to look into, so that's been really exciting this year.
Yeah, no, I think engaging is the word.
And in the enlightening moments of, other cultures and time points, oh, this is what that was like, where you just want more and more information as much as possible. Got it. Totally get it.
Yeah. I feel like engaging is the key word there, because I feel like there's so much of us talking about time travel and wanting to transcend these boundaries, and suddenly we find that we can do them.
Right.
Do that.
But we can't just, I can't do Henry Thoreau like I usually do him, standing in front of an audience just reading a lecture. I do it that way because that's the way he would have done it. I can't do that on Zoom because it would be really boring. So now we gotta figure out a way. This is kind of forcing us to make history accessible to everybody and to make it interesting for everybody. Because everybody from somebody in Australia to an 11-year-old kid could be watching anything that we do. So suddenly, and who knows if they even speak English. So, we have to make this accessible and interesting and informative and fun and educational for everybody, because now I don't have just the same 20 people in Concord sitting in front of me that I see at every lecture. It's people all around the world.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and we have to be more careful and more thoughtful also about how we choose what to include. I just saw a video done by a historian who creates like hundreds of these videos where it's literally a picture of him and he's telling a story, but he's also just the main part of the screen is him scrolling through YouTube and his blog and all of these images happening all at once while he's also telling you something, while he's showing you text, while there are all these images that don't really seem connected to what he's saying or to the text. And it's difficult to follow, but it's also like this multimedia overload in this one thing where you're like, all right, so is that too much, or do I just need to watch it again? Or would it have been better if I just had him, talking directly to the camera the whole time so I could focus just on the story too?
And it's always knowing your audience, right? In a small way, like for me, it's like I always, even when I'm presenting for my staff and faculty at school, I always play music, right? I start the meeting with music and I end with music because I think music is such a tying force for everything, right? And if you pick the right music, actually what you are about to talk about sticks more, which I find really incredible. So I've been really more pragmatic about like, what song am I picking today? But it's also part of like the presentation stuff, right? So if too much visuals, you have to worry about your people who are different learners and like, are you overwhelming their ability to digest what you're saying? So like, how much is too much? And like, when do I put it in? Do I give their brain a break? Like just that accessibility point, right? Like it allows when you're doing this to include so much more, but you also have to like be able to take off a little so that you're not overwhelming some of your audience members.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so every place in Concord, I think the historic sites, when I say every place in Concord, the historic sites, I think, are all doing a pretty good job about being able to continue doing what it is they do best. I know that the Concord Museum is open for tours, but they're not getting the kind of crowds that they would be getting ordinarily. And so winter tends to be kind of quiet in Concord because a lot of the historic sites are closed. We're not doing as many tours as we usually do.
Well, and I also, let me insert that like the Alcott, the Orchard House, Little Women was the big hit movie for Christmas last year. So the Orchard House was expecting and getting really droves of people. And then suddenly their fortunes completely changed.
Right. So now winter is no longer an excuse in Concord not to do some kind of program, because now we've got Zoom and we've got virtual programming. So it's almost like usually by the end of October, we all take a breath for a couple of months and start to plan things for the spring in terms of programming and lectures and tours. But now we can't do that anymore because we've been doing it for 9 months. And now we have to keep doing what we've been doing. So, I'm happy to see that all the historic sites in Concord have a social media presence. Everybody has a Facebook page. Every author has a Facebook page or a Twitter account or an Instagram account. There's Henry Thoreau Twitter accounts, and there's Concord Museum Twitter accounts, and Thoreau Society Facebook pages, and Robbins House Facebook pages. We're all kind of doing what we need to do first to get the word out about the history that we love, but also I think it's bringing us all closer. I mean, it sounds so corny, but we've got people from all around the world watching us do our things now. So the world, because of the pandemic, the world has gotten to be a much smaller place because everybody's now coming to Concord virtually to listen to our lectures and see our programs. Yeah. So in some ways, maybe that's the takeaway that we can have from the pandemic is it's forced us all to be more creative, and it's forced us all together virtually to be able to talk about the things that we love talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would say instead of forced, I would say it's given us the impetus to be more creative, and to, it gave us the time to, say, okay, how can I really reach out to the audience? How can I really find them where they're at? Which is, I think, something that we've talked about a lot. But once you get into the habit of just having a lecture series or bringing people into your historic site or whatever the usual venues, what do you do without them? And, you replicate them online, and then it turns out to be this just standard thing. So, yeah, I think it's been really incredible.
Yeah. So,
and any final words, or like, where do you think we should go from here? Like, what kind of technology do you wish could be developed, or what would you do with your next?
Richie wants the hologram.
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than actually dressing up as Henry Thoreau and going to a place, I could just send out a hologram of Henry Thoreau, and I wouldn't have to leave the comfort of my house. So
I feel like I would like that sometimes, actually, as well, for certain things. I wish that there was a way that we could see each other in a more less screen way, if that makes sense, but not hologram. I'm not sure what I'm quite looking for, but a way where I don't have to scroll through screens to see everyone's face, like where it could kind of feel like we're all sitting together somehow. So maybe I want hologram, but like projected holograms, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I will take your idea of the hologram, and I also want to add Pokemon Go, because it's been my long-term fantasy to create a Pokemon Go thing within Concord, but make it all about the authors and stuff in nature. And you have to go into the woods to find, a beautiful flower blooming. And then there's a hologram that comes up, and it's Henry, and he's talking about it,
Ooh, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
So, that'll be next year. That's our plan for next year.
Exactly. And if we get, $1 million of funding, some angel investor,
some IT people who are just want to I love history and IT. Let's do this, right? That's all we really need. It's just someone who has this intersection of tech savvy and history love.
There's a Henry Thoreau video game. So if you can create a Henry Thoreau video game, you can create a Henry Thoreau Pokemon. Absolutely.
Exactly. And I want to take it into even virtual reality, or augmented reality, or literally the next dimension. So
that's a great idea.
All right, cool. Well, this was a really fabulous conversation.
Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks, Tammy.
Thank you, Richard and Nikki. See you guys next time.